The ring had been on his hand for 9 years and 3 of those after the funeral. So when he slid it off at my kitchen table and set it gently beside his coffee cup, I forgot how to breathe. He looked up at me and whispered, "I'm ready now." If stories about second chances move you, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope. My name is Shane, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had already used up my share of luck. I run a small ceramic studio in the Forest Park neighborhood of Birmingham, Alabama, a narrow brick storefront with a wheel in the back, a kiln that hums like a sleeping animal, and a front window full of mugs that no two are ever quite alike. I am 46. I make bowls for a living. I had made peace with quiet. Then Donovan walked in on a Tuesday in October, holding a chipped honey jar like it was something holy. He wanted me to teach him to make one just like it. "My husband made this," he said, and then he corrected himself, soft and careful. "My late husband, Lionel, he took a class somewhere years ago. This is the only one that survived the move." I took the jar from him. It was a beginner's piece, lopsided and thick-walled, glazed in uneven amber. By any technical measure, it was a failure. By the way Donovan held his breath while I turned it in my hands, it was a masterpiece. "I can teach you," I said. "It won't come out like this one. They never do." "That's all right," he said. "I don't want a copy. I just want to understand how he felt when he made it." That was the first thing I learned about Donovan. Before I learned he kept bees for a living. Before I learned the shape of his laugh. He was a man still in conversation with someone who was gone. He signed up for 6 weeks of evening lessons. He showed up early every single time, smelling faintly of smoke and clover, his forearms freckled from years of working outdoors. He told me he ran an apiary out past Oak Mountain, a few hundred hives he trucked to farms for pollination, plus the honey he sold at the market on Saturdays. "Bees don't grieve," he told me once, centering clay badly, his tongue between his teeth. "They just keep building." I find that comforting and a little insulting. I laughed before I could stop myself. He looked up, surprised and pleased, like he hadn't made anyone laugh in a long while. Here is the first thing I noticed and tried not to notice. The wedding ring. Plain titanium, worn smooth. He never took it off, not even when wet clay swallowed his knuckles and I had to gently tell him it would be easier without it. He'd glance at it, then keep going, ring and all, clay caking around the band. I never pushed. It wasn't my place. But I wondered. Here is the second thing. Every lesson, at exactly 8 o'clock, his phone would buzz once, and he would step outside to listen to a voicemail. The same voicemail I came to understand every night. He never explained it. He'd come back in calmer or sometimes quieter, and we'd keep working like nothing had happened. I didn't ask. But I wondered about that too. And here is the third thing, the one that mattered most. 6 weeks ended, and Donovan signed up for 6 more. Then 6 after that. By February, he wasn't really taking lessons anymore. He was just coming to see me, and we both knew it, and neither of us said it out loud. We started getting coffee after the studio closed, at a little place on Highland Avenue where the owner knew us by our orders. We talked about everything except the obvious. He told me about Lionel slowly, in pieces, the way you'd hand someone fragile photographs one at a time. They'd been together 11 years, married for 2 of them when the laws finally caught up. Lionel had been a music teacher, a band director at a high school in Homewood, the kind of man who made strangers feel like old friends within 5 minutes. He'd died of a heart condition nobody caught in time, on an ordinary Sunday while making pancakes. He just sat down, Donovan said he felt dizzy, and then he was gone. 41 years old, he turned his coffee cup in slow circles the way he turned clay. The hardest part isn't the big things. It's the pancakes. I can't make them. I've tried. I get the batter out and I just stand there. I didn't try to fix it. I'd learned by then that some grief doesn't want fixing. It wants witnessing. So I just said, then we won't make pancakes. We'll make something new. He looked at me for a long moment. You keep saying things like that. Like what? Like there's a future in them. I felt my face go warm and looked down at the table. That was the night I admitted to myself what I'd been refusing to admit for months. I was falling for a man who still wore another man's ring. And the worst, most selfish part of me had begun to wonder when or whether he ever would take it off. I want to be honest about something here because I promised myself I'd tell this story straight. I never once asked him to. I never said a word against Lionel. Never sighed at the ring. Never made him feel like his grief was an obstacle in my path. Lionel deserved better than that, and so did Donovan. A man's love for someone he lost is not a door I had any right to push on. If Donovan was going to walk forward, he had to do it on his own 2 feet, in his own time. My job was to be a place worth walking toward, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt sometimes. There were evenings he'd go quiet, get that distant look, and I knew he'd gone somewhere I couldn't follow. There were Saturdays I'd stop by his honey stand at the market and watch him charm an entire line of customers, lit up and alive, and then watch the light dim the moment he was alone again. I started to feel like a man waiting outside a house I'd never be invited into. The locked house wasn't only a metaphor. Donovan had a shed behind his place near Oak Mountain, and in the spring he finally invited me out to see the hives. It was a good day, one of the best. The air thick with the drowsy roar of bees and the smell of warm wax. He suited me up, laughing at how stiff I stood, and showed me the frames, the queen, the small daily miracle of it all. But when we passed the shed, he didn't open it. "Storage," he said too quickly and steered me toward the porch. I let it go, but I noticed. Spring turned to a heavy Alabama summer. We spent more and more time together. We hiked the trails at Ruffner Mountain, sweating and complaining and happy. We drove out to the Cahaba River to see the lilies bloom, those white flowers that only open for a few weeks and only in a few places on Earth. And Donovan stood at the water's edge and didn't speak for a long time, and I let him have his silence. We were, by any reasonable definition, courting. We held hands now. He'd kiss me good night at my door, soft and certain. But always, between us, was the ring. One August evening, after a thunderstorm had cooled everything down, we sat on his porch and he told me about a trip. He and Lionel had always planned to drive the whole coast, the long way around the Gulf and beyond, no schedule, just the two of them and a tank of gas. They'd put it off, the way you do. Sure, they had decades. We were going to go for our 10th anniversary, he said. He died 8 months before. You should still go, I said. I can't, he said. Not without him. And not with... He stopped. Not with me, I finished gently. He didn't deny it. He looked down at the ring, turned it once around his finger, and said the thing I'd been afraid of for almost a year. Shane, I don't know if I can be what you deserve. I'm not sure I know how to belong to anyone again. Part of me is still standing in that kitchen, waiting for him to get up. I wanted to argue. I wanted to make my case. Instead, I took his hand, the one with the ring, and held it in both of mine. I'm not asking you to stop loving him, I said. I would never ask that. I'm just asking if there's room. That's all, room. He didn't answer. He squeezed my hand once, hard, and then he stood and went inside. And I drove home through the wet streets not knowing if I'd just ruined the best thing in my life or finally told the truth. For 3 weeks. He didn't call. 3 weeks is not a long time. When you're waiting to find out whether your heart was a fool, it is geological. I threw myself into the studio. I told myself I'd respected his grief, that I'd done everything right, that if it wasn't meant to be, then at least I hadn't dishonored Lionel or pressured a hurting man. All of that was true, and none of it made the silence easier. I made the worst pottery of my career. I caught myself reaching for my phone 20 times a day and putting it down. What I didn't know was that Donovan was doing some of the hardest work of his life, and I wasn't there to see it. He told me about it later, all of it, so I can tell you now. That night on the porch had cracked something open. He'd gone to a grief counselor for the first time, a woman who specialized in spousal loss, and he'd sat in her office and said out loud the sentence he'd been hiding from for 2 years. I think I'm falling in love again, and I feel like I'm cheating. The counselor didn't flinch. She asked him whose voice was saying he was cheating, and Donovan realized it wasn't Lionel's. Lionel, of all people, had been generous to the bone, the kind of man who would have hated leaving Donovan alone in a cold house. The voice saying he was betraying anyone was Donovan's own fear, dressed up in Lionel's memory and pretending to speak for him. Then she asked about the voicemail. That was the second open loop, and here is where it pays off. Every night at 8, Donovan had been listening to the last message Lionel ever left him, a 30-second nothing of a message from that final week. Hey, it's me. I forgot the eggs again. Can you grab some on your way home? Love you, bye. 2 years. 700 some nights. The same eggs, the same love you, bye. He'd built his entire grief around making sure he never lost the sound of that voice. And what would happen, the counselor asked, if you let yourself go a single night without listening? He said he'd been terrified that the day he stopped, Lionel would truly be gone. That as long as he listened, some part of his husband was still alive, still asking for eggs, still expecting him home. She let that sit. Then she said something Donovan repeated to me word for word because it changed everything. He isn't in the voicemail. He's in you. He's in how you love. You can't lose him by living. You can only lose him by stopping. That night, for the first time in 2 years, 8 o'clock came and went, and Donovan didn't press play. He told me he sat on the floor of his living room and shook. He waited to feel Lionel slip away. Instead, he felt something he hadn't expected, which was permission. He sat there until midnight, and somewhere in those 4 hours, he understood that grief and love are not enemies, and neither are the dead and the living. He could carry Lionel forward instead of staying frozen beside him. And the strange, unbearable truth was that staying frozen had not been honoring Lionel at all. It had only been hiding. The next morning, he drove out to the shed, the third open loop. He'd kept it locked for 2 years because it held all of Lionel's things. The boxes he couldn't sort, the trombone, the records, the apron with the faded notes still written on the tag, and Lionel's own pottery wheel, the cheap second-hand one he'd bought after that single class, the one he'd been too busy to ever use again. Donovan had locked it all away because opening that door meant admitting Lionel was never coming back to it. He spent 2 days in that shed. He played the records. He held the trombone and cried until he laughed at himself. And at the bottom of a box, he found a notebook. Lionel's handwriting, lists and dreams and half-finished plans, and on one page, dated the spring before he died, a sentence that knocked the wind out of him. Note to self: if anything ever happens to me, do not let Donovan turn into a museum. He'll want to. Don't let him. I have thought about that line more times than I can count. Lionel knew him. Lionel, 2 years dead, reached forward through a cheap spiral notebook and gave the man he loved a push toward the rest of his life. All of this was happening while I was at my wheel making garbage and assuming I'd lost him. On the 22nd day, the bell over my studio door rang. I looked up, clay to my elbows, and there was Donovan, sunburned and lighter somehow, like he'd set something heavy down. He was holding 2 grocery bags. I owe you an apology and an explanation, he said. Can I cook you dinner? Here? Now? I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded and pointed at the little hot plate in the back. He made pancakes. At 7 in the evening in a pottery studio with terrible little plastic plates. His hands were steady. He told me everything. The counselor, the voicemail, the shed, the notebook, all of it spilling out while the batter sizzled. And then he said, "I haven't taken the ring off yet. I want you to know that's not because of you. It's because I want to do it the right way, when it means something, not in a panic and not to prove a point. But I wanted you to know it's coming. I wanted you to know there's room. There's so much room, Shane. I've been an idiot about the size of my own heart. I have never tasted better pancakes in my life, before or since. We were good after that, better than good. He started staying for dinner more nights than not. He helped me load the kiln and learn to read the cones. I went out to the apiary on weekends and got stung exactly twice and complained about it for a month. We finally, properly, became a couple, the kind that argues about whose turn it is to buy paper towels. He talked about Lionel often and easily now, no longer like handing me fragile photographs, but like introducing me to family. I came to love a man I never met, because the man I did love was made partly out of him. But the ring stayed on. And I'd told myself I would never ask, so I didn't. September turned to October, a full year since he'd walked in with that honey jar. And then one evening, washing dishes at his place, he went very still with his hands in the soapy water, staring at the ring under the surface. "It won't come off," he said, and laughed, but it was a thin laugh. "I've worn it so long my knuckle grew around it. I tried last week. It wouldn't budge. I think I waited too long. I think I'm stuck." I dried my hands and came over and looked. He wasn't wrong exactly, but he wasn't stuck either. He was scared. After everything, after the shed and the notebook and the pancakes, there was still a last thin wall and we'd both run straight into it. "Donovan," I said carefully, "you don't have to take it off for me. I mean that. I'd marry you tomorrow with that ring on your hand and Lionel's name in the toast." He turned and looked at me, water dripping off his fingers, and his eyes were doing something I'd never seen them do. "That's exactly why I'm going to," he said. "Come to my place Saturday morning, early. I have to do something first. And I need you there for the part that comes after." And then he wouldn't say another word about it. No matter how I pressed, I barely slept Friday night. Saturday, I drove out to Oak Mountain in the gray light before dawn, gravel crunching under my tires, my stomach in knots. I had no idea what I was walking into. I'd half convinced myself it was bad news. That's what waiting does to you. Donovan met me at the door with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a look on his face I can only describe as resolved. "Walk with me," he said. We went out past the hives, quiet and clustered in the cold, past the porch to the shed. The shed I'd never seen the inside of. He'd unlocked it. The door stood open and morning light fell across boxes neatly labeled now, a trombone on a stand, records in a crate, and in the center, dusted off and oiled, Lionel's old pottery wheel. "I want to show you what I've been doing," Donovan said. On the shelf were jars, a dozen of them, maybe more, in every stage of failure and improvement, lopsided and thick-walled and slowly, over weeks, getting better. He'd been practicing. Out here, alone, on Lionel's wheel, in secret, all those evenings I thought he was just tired. He picked up the best one, an amber-glazed honey jar, nearly the twin of the one he'd carried into my studio a year before. "I finally understand how he felt when he made the first one," Donovan said quietly. "He felt like he was making something for someone he loved. I made this one for you." I couldn't speak. He pressed the warm jar into my hands. "I had to learn it on his wheel," he said. "I had to start the new chapter in the same place I'd locked the old one away. I didn't want to leave him behind to get to you. I wanted to bring him with me. He'd have liked you, Shane. He'd have liked you so much it would have made me jealous." I laughed and it came out wet. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small bottle of olive oil, of all things, and a clean rag. And he sat down on an overturned crate and went to work on the ring, patient, unhurried, the way you center clay. It resisted, the way it had at the sink. And for a moment I thought it wouldn't come. and I saw the fear flicker across his face. Then he breathed out, slow, and the ring turned and slid and came free. He held it in his open palm. We both looked at it. Plain titanium, worn smooth, the most ordinary object in the world and the heaviest thing either of us had ever carried. He didn't throw it in a drawer. He didn't bury it in a box. He carried it back to the house, and at his kitchen table he set it gently beside his coffee cup. And that is the moment the whole year had been quietly walking toward. The moment I told you about at the very beginning. I forgot how to breathe. He looked up at me and whispered, "I'm ready now." Then he stood and went to the cabinet and took down a small shadow box he'd made himself. Clumsy carpentry, but careful, and inside it he placed the ring beside Lionel's photograph and a slip of paper. He let me read it. It was that line from the notebook, copied in Donovan's own hand. "Do not let Donovan turn into a museum." "This isn't a museum," he said, hanging it on the wall by the door, where he'd see it every time he left and every time he came home. "It's a doorway. He's not behind me. He's beside me. And now there's room for you in front. I want to tell you we got married in some grand way, but that wouldn't be true to who we are. We married the next spring, small, in the field behind the apiary with the bees roaring their drowsy approval and maybe 20 people in folding chairs. Donovan's hand was bare. In his toast, he said Lionel's name, just as I'd promised him he could, and nobody cried more than I did. We kept the shadow box by the door of the house we now share. And the trip. We finally took the trip. Not the exact one Donovan had planned with Lionel, because that wasn't ours to take. We made a new route, our own, down along the Gulf with no schedule and a tank of gas, just the two of us. On the first morning, in a roadside motel with thin coffee and a tiny stove, Donovan made pancakes. His hands were steady. He smiled the whole time. When I asked him about it, he said, "I figured out they were never really Lionel's pancakes or mine. They're just breakfast. And I'm hungry, and I'm here, and so are you. I still run the studio in Forest Park. Donovan still keeps his bees. On the front window now, between the mugs, there sits an amber honey jar, lopsided and thick-walled and perfect, that customers sometimes ask to buy. It's the only thing in the shop that isn't for sale. People talk about moving on like it means leaving something behind. I don't believe that anymore. I watched a man learn that you can carry your whole life with you and still walk forward. That love doesn't expire and grief doesn't disqualify you from joy. And that the bravest thing a person can do is open a locked door and let the morning in. He finally removed his wedding ring to start a new chapter with me. But he never closed the book on the man who taught him how to love in the first place. And somehow, impossibly, there was room for all of it. There was so much room. That's the part nobody tells you about a broken heart. It doesn't get smaller when it heals. It gets bigger. It learns to hold more. If you made it all the way here with us, thank you for sitting